This video contains disturbing content, violent content and strong language. Viewer discretion advised.
Hi everyone, you know why you're here, right?
How did you know I was coming at all?
It's obvious. Most of you are here from your disappointing games. I mean, let's start with you, Duke. What happened? The original was great. We all thought this one would be just as good.
Yeah, but after 12 fucking years, it should be.
Logan, anything?
Logan Carter is no goddamn douchebag.
Nico, well, I'm not even gonna speak to you.
I'm going to feel like enough of an asshole doing this without people watching me.
Project Delta? I mean, why? Chief at the back there, got anything? Well, it's time, I think, to name out the long anticipated video, Most Disappointing Games. And we start right now.
Every year brings those games that we're all looking forward to, the blockbusters that are the reason we love gaming. There have been plenty of hype games over the years and many of them have lived up to it.
However, for every 5 great games, there's just one terrible one that was so hyped and everyone had expected so much from it, but it didn't deliver.
While there's some you may agree and some you will disagree, here is the top 70 disappointing games. Epic Mickey: The Power of Two. Everything about Epic Mickey 2, from the fiddly controls to the boring, repetitive levels, is a letdown. As Mickey, you're spending the game jumping listlessly from platform to platform, hosing various objects down with your magic paintbrush. Your companion throughout this misbegotten adventure is a floppy-eared simpleton named Oswald, who stumbles around in circles and scolds you for hosing him down when he gets in your way. In terms of gameplay and overall polish, the game is nowhere near as complete as its predecessor. Test Drive Unlimited 2. This game had high ambitions and missed out hitting nearly each and every one of them. The first Test Drive Unlimited game was revolutionary. It had its issues, but it was a damn good game. But Test Drive Unlimited 2 is incredibly buggy, incredibly difficult, and incredibly infuriating. The big difference here is the handling, in which the developers somehow tweaked, making the cars handle a lot worse than its predecessor. After the release of the game, many outraged players complained on several game-breaking bugs, such as the save files being corrupted. The developers responded with all the criticism and agreed that a patch was being made, but in the end, all went quiet on the forums and no update was made. Dark Void. For a game that's all about flying, this game does it well. You can easily fly around doing acrobatic maneuvers and shooting at the same time, but all of the other segments just aren't as fun. The third-person shooting moments are competent, but are lacking. The cover system is terrible, the gun mechanics constantly fight with you, there's no multiplayer at all, which means no co-op campaign, no dogfights with your friends online, and no jetpacking around together. So, basically after you finish the campaign, you're done. Rage. Rage actually looked pretty good. It was made by ID, the legends behind such games as Doom, Quake and Wolfenstein. So, naturally we got excited. If not for the screen tearing, textures failing to load, models popping up the screen for no apparent reason, unexplained flashes, then this may have been an awesome game. There is zero interaction of the environment, it's illusionary, static, it becomes more noticeable when driving the vehicles. Rage could have been a much better game without the design shortcuts. They even have an actual bug testing process before launch. It still stands as the game doesn't have enough content to keep players interested. Fallout New Vegas. Let's face it, Fallout 3 was some of the Bethesda's best work. It featured a massive overworld, a rather interesting story and a number of side quests. This is the type of game that would leave players realising that they played it for hours on end. So naturally, when the sequel was announced, everyone got excited. But the game was a letdown. True, the overworld was huge, but it was bland and lacked the charm of Fallout 3. The story was also very boring, being entirely based upon revenge. Your character was also very dull, having absolutely no backstory, and thus the player felt no emotional connection to the character. A poorly thought out yet incredibly simplistic RPG system effectively killed any sort of difficulty in this game. All in all, Fallout New Vegas was just an undelivering sequel.
Halo 4. Graphically outstanding, and the soundtrack is good, although sadly none of the nostalgic scores remain. Halo 4 is essentially an old dog with no new tricks. It's just been bathed in a coat of polish to make it look anew. The game also has many bugs and glitches with broken, missing features, and the developers have been extremely slow in fixing and addressing these major issues. The lack of customization in a series which has always been good for is very hard to explain and accept. Coupled with the fact that most pre-ordered content was missing, the result is a series that now feels a little stagnant and dated in a world where countless developers are trying new things. Halo needs a creative burst to grow, and the inspiration that Bungie left behind is clearly not, judging from Halo 4. Spider-Man: Edge of Time. Spider-Man: Edge of Time was forced to streamline their formula in order to meet the single one-year deadline. The story had its promise, and was meant to make up for the lack of Spider-Man, but even that was handled terribly, as that ended up reusing the same locations over and over again. Boss fights lost their magic, and even switching between Spider-Man 2099 and contemporary Spider-Man brought even less of a variety. It was too much forced on a single developer far too quickly. Dead Island. The trailer for this game was very misleading. It looked like a game that would offer a sad, unique, gritty, serious, emotional story and gameplay that we'd never experienced before. However, what do you think? None of the heart and depth that we thought the game would have when we watched the teaser trailer made it into the final product. Instead, we were given a repetitive and soulless game. As for the story itself, it's nothing short of boring, predictable, and absolutely unforgettable. Most of the missions didn't feel engaging at any point at all. The characters you come across are bland and don't really fit the story at all, they just serve as mission bores. Despite the detailed graphics, there were stupid features of this game, such as paying your own money to repair your own damaged weapon. Let's think about that for a second and just ponder it. Think of how stupid that sounds, okay?
Final Fantasy XIII. Final Fantasy XIII is probably one of the biggest disappointments of the 7th generation of gaming. Role-playing elements are inexistent, combat mechanics are anything but innovative, the story is cliché and boring, same with the characters. Everything is told with cutscenes, making the player feel that there's a wall between them and the game world. The player's input in this game is so limited. You follow the line on your minimap, fighting boring battles, waiting for the next cutscene, just waiting for the game to come alive. Never once did we give up hope that all the mundanity was a precursor for an explosion of the usual FF charm. Ingenuity, beauty, incredible story, characters. Square Enix's only purpose to make Final Fantasy XIII was to tell a story but forget that it was supposed to be a game. Hitman Absolution. Compared to all the other Hitman series, Absolution feels like a kick in the teeth. Poor design decisions makes the latest installment of the Hitman series a huge disappointment. Gone are the sprawling sandbox-style killing grounds of Blood Money. They've been replaced with tiny linear corridors where your goal very rarely even involves taking out a target. Each of Absolution's mission objectives is focused on advancing to the next pre-rendered cutscene. There might be multiple ways of finishing levels, but you can't experiment as there's no save option. When you fail, you'll have to restart all over again, including all the cutscenes as well.
Homefront. Not many people are saying this, so I think it's about time I actually finally make a statement about it. These days, the whole FPS genre has really hit the point of been there, done that. You hear me, Call of Duty? Opinion! Anyways, Homefront tried to set itself apart with its story, which it ended up doing. Unfortunately, the campaign was just so short that many went the multiplayer route. It did, however, provide enough variety to be unique, but when Black Ops and Battlefield were lying around, it was hard to make it a worthwhile argument. Sadly, this game didn't deliver to its fullest, and if it did, it would have been absolutely amazing. Ratchet and Clank, All for One. Ratchet and Clank. Who doesn't love that game? Third-person action at its finest. However, we're not talking about regular Ratchet and Clank. We're talking about Ratchet and Clank All for One, the biggest flop of the entire series. You know, it started a trend, actually, because it seems that nowadays you just can't move on without seeing yet another single-player title that's just went and retooled its entire structure just to make way for multiple players. While previous Ratchet and Clank games have been strictly single-player affairs, All for One is designed entirely around its 4-player co-op system. All for One shares much in common with top-down arcade shooters, much more so than the third-person action game found in other previous installments. There are clear problems with the camera angles at many times, with no manual control for it at all. It's such a frustrating thing to deal with, especially when you can't judge how far a jump is. It's sad to see these fantastic characters appear in a poorly structured, mediocre game that's full of camera issues and silly bugs. And in my opinion, it commits the ultimate grievous sin by putting number 4 in the title where there should be the word 4, and putting a 4 because it's a 4-player co-op game that just... Oh, I hate when games do that.
Ghost Recon Future Soldier. Now, despite the game being called Ghost Recon, all of the maps are close quarters urban settings instead of the wilderness maps that were always a staple of the Ghost Recon series, and which always facilitated the most fun and realistic gameplay. The developers changed many aspects of the game from the previous installment. In addition, you're pretty much forced to use the cover system, which is extremely clumsy and annoying, and completely destroys the realistic feel of previous Ghost Recon games. You can't control your AI partners or tell them where to go, and all the best parts of the multiplayer features such as team deathmatch and co-op strategy missions were gone. It's like the designers targeted all the best aspects of the previous games and eliminated every single one of them for no reason. True Ghost Recon fans were annoyed at the changes. Gears of War Judgment. A game not even made by Epic, but made by People Can Fly, the same company that gave us the awesome Painkiller. The first thing you'll notice about its multiplayer component is the very little amount of mode and maps offered here. They've completely removed the Locust team and replaced them with just the COG. And it's not just that either. Many little tweaks of previous games have disappeared too. The inclusion of switching all the basic controls, players start with frag grenades, there's no horde mode or warzone mode, and the most glaring aspect is, you can't even active reload anymore. You can tell a real hardcore Game of Gears fan from a casual one, just by the reviews you see on many forums and sites. Burnout Crash. Burnout Crash is a disappointment. The decision to change its graphics to that of 2D is questionable, but it doesn't provide the same spectacle as its previous Crash mode games did. It doesn't hold any kind of comparison to the other Burnout titles and doesn't really count as a true Burnout game. The car selection is minimal and the gameplay of each mode can become repetitive after long periods of playing. There's a party mode that uses the Kinect and has you trying to physically match the on-screen pose to trigger the crash. But what we aren't seeing is any detailed car models or exploding car parts like we have in the previous games. For $5 you can't really complain, but when Criterion are making games like this and not focusing on the true Burnout formula, it makes you wonder if they're running out of ideas. Need for Speed The Run. An unexciting racer with a terrible idea for a story we've ever had to play through. There just wasn't much to do in this game. Rubber Band AI reared its ugly head once again. The story was painfully short, there was no free roam, and what's worse, the quick time events felt like a complete afterthought. More avalanches and chase sequences would have kept this racer in our systems for a bit longer. Next time we expect something more worthwhile, EA. Crysis 3. Crysis 3 might as well be called Crysis 2 2.0 because that's really all it is. It's a reskinned version of the second and plays almost entirely the same. Gorgeous graphics don't compensate for the atrocious gameplay that Crysis 3 delivers. The gameplay is by far the most linear and repetitive gameplay of the series so far. Multiplayer means that the developers get to stop working after levels are built and they expect the customer to create their own sense of immersion. Multiplayer is average, at best, and brings nothing new to the table at all. In fact, finding a server is one of the hardest parts of the game. Crysis 3 is the worst game in the franchise yet and is a shining example to show that graphics cannot make a good game if the gameplay, story and pretty much everything else just doesn't work. BioShock 2. The worst part is just, it felt lazy. there was nothing really there that excited me with this one. There was so much in Rapture that could have been explored, yet this is one that just didn't jump on any of that potential. Instead, we get a decent game that wasn't going to set the world on fire. The game just lets you be a big daddy, but you don't really feel like you want at any given point, which is truly disappointing. The original Bioshock story and the deep, dark themes it explored were what made it such a great game. It didn't need a sequel. Metroid Other M. The actual gameplay works quite well, but combined with the horrible plot, confusing first-person elements, and abandonment of the classic Metroid exploration, leaves this game a stain on an otherwise relatively untarnished series. The game's cutscenes are a visual highlight, if too overlong. Gameplay mechanics are unnecessarily cumbersome and limiting just for the sake of being innovative. The way Samus is portrayed is very confusing, seeing as her behaviour and personality in cutscenes don't reflect how she behaves in game itself. Perhaps Team Ninja should stick to making Ninja Gaiden and Dead or Alive games, instead of ruining Samus' reputation with a flawed game.
Call of Juarez, The Cartel. The Call of Juarez saga had a competent and enjoyable first-person shooter aesthetic, with a decent variety of story and gameplay. Now, The Cartel, a modernized take on the Wild West, should never have been made or associated with the series at all. The biggest problem with The Cartel is that it's so handholdy. There are plenty of things to be wary of in The Cartel. Technical issues including clipping, low-res texturing, and some really terrible looking animation. Cartel just has a sheer lack of innovative ideas that made its predecessor, Bound in Blood, so much better. It's a shame, really.
Lord of the Rings, War in the North. This game lied. It promised multiple customization options, 2-player co-op, and a story that we'd never seen before. It only delivered one, co-op, but even that wasn't enjoyable. The customization was non-existent, you had the characters to control the story, and that was it. Also, similar to Resident Evil 5, if you play alone, the AI is unbearable. Your partner will run into combat like a tank, get himself killed, and then you'll be left defending for yourself. And not to mention the items. It's very hard to find any item that is on par or better than your weapon. What's bad about this is that the more you progress, the enemies get harder and harder, and you'll be still left using the same weapon. And you rarely ever find money, so you can't buy a better weapon. Bottom line is, this game looked good. It really did. Red Steel. Red Steel tried to promote the revolutionary gameplay, promising an authentic swordplay experience that would be as realistic as it gets. We saw screens and video clips prior to release with blades swiping across the screen mixed with some heavy gunplay. It was by far the system's best launch title for the mature audience. However, the responsiveness was terrible and many melee situations were made frustrating when you couldn't get your character to block and swing at the right moment. Red Steel showed that while the Wii's new fragile motion controls were far from flawless, it was still bad. SOCOM 4. This SOCOM is the biggest disappointment in the once very popular SOCOM franchise. It lacks the very essentials that help make a team-based strategy game amazing. SOCOM is all about online multiplayer gameplay, but when players played this game, they were greeted with no lobby system, only quick match options, where little to no communication takes place, and since there was no party system, you can even play with a friend. The game was released before it was even completed, and there was a whole host of patches needed to fix the glitches and errors present in this game. Some couldn't even be fixed. Saints Row the Third. Saints Row the Third unfortunately couldn't live up to the reputation of Saints Row 2. It takes place in a new city called Steelport, which you think would be good, but it just leaves you missing the original town. Also, the way they tried way too hard up the ante with the ridiculousness this time. In Saints Row 2, there were fun but over-the-top minigames like crowd control and fuzz. You also notice that the game has removed virtually all the customizational features from Saints Row 2, meaning you couldn't customize cribs or clothes as much as you wanted to. The fact that the NPCs and in-game shots showed posters of various characters in clothes you couldn't even wear was downright disappointing. Because Steelport's actual layout is very linear and confusing, it's really easy to get lost in it, and every street corner looks exactly the same after a while.
Ninja Gaiden 3. No, we're not talking about Razor Edge, but we're talking the original Ninja Gaiden 3. The game wasn't directed by the infamous Tomonobu Itagaki. and the fact showed. Every good part from the original games was just stripped down and removed, and became extremely repetitive. There was no leveling up of weapons, no gore and dismemberment, and was chock full of annoying QuickTime events. The combat was extremely dumbed down, and it's impossible to pull away from a group and target a single enemy, since the game pretty much just decides that for you. It's obvious that the game was simplified and streamlined to attract the casual crowd, and it was a failed attempt unless you're looking for a completely mindless action game, and a ton of emphasis was placed on telling a story. But that being said, the story doesn't even make sense either. It doesn't tie in with the rest of the series. What the hell?
Command & Conquer 4 Tiberian Twilight. Moronic gameplay stolen from various other games coupled with ridiculous DRM system that demands players to always be online even when playing single player are two huge, enormous, unforgivable mistakes. They couldn't have done a better job of destroying the series if they'd actually tried. Overall, from just a gameplay perspective, this product fails on every level. It feels like there was no talent at all in this game. A lot of the strategy of the game is taken away when you can only build up to no more than 20 units, and don't have to worry about resources. In addition, taking away the ability to build both offensive units, defensive units, support units and buildings at the same time, making the actual planning and strategy of the game on a super low level. Medal of Honor Warfighter. Many words have been spoken by the developers on how they attempt to differentiate themselves from the other FPS in the genre by adding a strong element of authenticity to their titles. Yes, this was achieved in 2010 Medal of Honor, however clearly lost in the ridiculous and confusing Warfighter. The trend of disappointing releases continues year after year, and Medal of Honor Warfighter is another rushed release relying on heavy advertising and butchered gameplay. This game makes no effort to immerse the gamer into a gritty, tough Warzone environment unlike the first title, where the audio and visual elements were far superior to its sequel. As a game, it's very mediocre, with nothing much standing out other than its chase sequences. It gets boring and repetitive very quickly, and with all the potential danger Close had with Frostbite 2, you'd think they would have made a game a bit more groundbreaking and unique. Alien Colonial Marines. This game is triumphant only in its massive failure to deliver any kind of satisfaction or enjoyable experience. The immersion promised in the pre-release video was stripped, leaving behind this generic shooter. The dialogue is awful with its forced, rehashed lines from aliens, and the gameplay becomes tedious. There was so much opportunity with this game to offer up something great, but it was squandered. What could have potentially been Gearbox's best game turned out to be something they don't even seem to want to comment, except blame other developers and Sega.
Serious Sam 2. Serious Sam was a unique first-person shooter that combined rural, wildlife areas with different monsters and ghouls that you had to destroy. It also featured some very hilariously goofy humor. Serious Sam 2 was the same, but not in a good way. They changed the graphics drastically, going from a more realistic graphic style to a cartoon Wind Waker style graphics. The weapons were extremely overpowered as well. You could kill any monster with 2 shots, maximum. The levels weren't complicated at all, and the bosses and monsters were a lot less creative than in the first game. The vehicles are very unoriginal, and it don't help at all to break up the shooting segments. Kane and Lynch 2, Dog Days. Kane and Lynch 2 is a bland, repetitive, unrewarding, and poorly designed sequel. The way in which the stylized camera work was done was really cool in theory, but after 1 or 2 cutscenes, it got incredibly annoying because it was completely overdone and just ruined the cutscenes and everything else. The shooting is boring and repetitive and poorly implemented. Simply put, the cover system is broken beyond all repair. Enemies can hit you from extreme distances, but you won't be able to hit them back unless you get real close most of the time. Weapons feel like cheap toys, and the combat itself is extremely annoying. The game throws dozens of waves of enemies at you throughout different levels, and it gets old really, really fast. It's a shame that the game turned out this way, because the original had a lot of potential. Assassin's Creed 3. Assassin's Creed was one of my favorite series, and I own every game, even the third one. But this one, even from the beginning opening sequence, I was disappointed. monumental disappointment stems from the realization that such an incredible game series has fallen so very far since the first and second games, including their variants. Despite being a stealth game, accomplishing objectives with stealth is either impossible or just unrewarding. The game emphasizes cinematics with a cutscene for every 5 gameplay minutes, which seems to serve as Ubisoft's effort to distract the player from the slow, simple, and glitchy gameplay. While the graphics are excellent and the story is absolutely appalling, alright? Just, the characters are worthless, including Connor and Desmond. The story felt hacked together like the writers had no idea where to take the series after Ezio. Not one thing in this game is revolutionary, and despite all the raving going on about how it's an achievement for the series, I, and everyone else, actually found that Assassin's Creed 3 is far more linear and less entertaining than the first game. Not only that, but it's just way more awkward and confusing as well. Two Worlds. Two Worlds is a truly unforgivable game. Compounded by the fact that on its initial release, it was being promoted as something that could easily stand shoulder to shoulder with games like Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. Random loading stops gameplay, and when you're in the middle of doing something. Enemies take a few seconds to pop in and can swarm you if you happen to run into an area where they haven't loaded yet. Most of the combat sections revolve around button mashing, and when interacting with the villagers you get some really cheesy and crummy voice acting. The steep learning curve coupled with mediocre graphics and serious glitches totally kills what could have been an enlightening adventure game. But after all these gripes, there's still an RPG in there, and the truth of the matter is that this game had some great ideas. The sequel did redeem itself quite a bit, but didn't come close to the powerhouse RPG titles out there. Fear 3. Nope, you did it again. F3AR. You know what, I'm going to refer to this game as F3er, just to piss the company off. F3er 3 will not offer fans of the series the single-player experience that they're looking for. It's ultimately an arcade version of Fear, the good Fear, with few scares and familiar mechanics. While 2 levels in the game were decently creepy, there wasn't anything that tied the series together. For the beginning part of the game, it takes place in some third world country with no explanation as to why the hell you're there. Now, the favorite weapons were still removed from the first game, such as the particle gun and repeater cannon. The ability to pick up health packs and the overall scare factor has been utterly destroyed. Co-op is fun, though only for a short time. While you will be competing with each other to maintain the highest score between the two of you, most of the time you and your friend will get bored of the story altogether and end up doing stupid shit such as finding glitches, which really brings down the haunting and scary tone that the other games in the series have created.
Dragon Age 2. Dragon Age 1 was like a fantasy Mass Effect. It featured an interesting story, dozens upon dozens of interesting side quests, and all the choices you made greatly affected the ending. Dragon Age 2 was completely different. The retooled combat system turned battles into button mashing contests, and the new setting didn't have much of a grand scale. Loyal fans of the series came out in droves to complain about the game's simplistic nature and half-hearted storytelling. The story and the characters were complete failures, and therefore any choice that we meant to make in regards to the journey was completely lacking in any significance.
Brink. On paper, Brink sounded like a great idea, an online objective-based shooter where players work together rather than simply shoot at each other. It has an awesome concept, but it just wasn't executed very well. Various technical glitches, online problems, and a dull story are just a few of the game's long list of issues. The single-player portion was nothing but a bunch of training exercises for the online portion. It was so bad that a free Day 1 DLC was released just to fix the errors. But even after that DLC, it was still virtually unplayable. So with all these things combined, it's not a very enjoyable experience, and I don't know why anyone would want to undertake it. I'm a masochist, and that still doesn't sound very appealing to me. Crackdown 2. Crackdown 2 is so similar to the original Crackdown that it ends up feeling more like an expansion pack than a completely new game. This is pretty troublesome, seeing as the game presents and sells itself for exactly the same price as a full retail title. Yet it's pretty damn obvious that a lot from the first game has been recycled. And we're not just talking about the platforming elements. The actual city map itself, locales in the game are all the same somewhat. While still fun, we couldn't stop but asking ourselves, why is this game selling for full retail? It didn't have the impact and fun as it did in the first game. Maybe next time, let's have Crackdown 3 in a completely different environment next time, with a bit more action and stuff to do.
X-Men Destiny. If there was ever a game that's future looked so bright, it was X-Men Destiny. The developers had the players under the impression that all your choices within the game would vastly change the ending. Well, it was a lie. The choices you made had barely any impact on the story and never had any rewards or consequences. The reality of this game, however, is that you only have one choice of 3 powers and 3 pre-made characters to choose from. And it really doesn't matter which character or which power set you choose, you still end up with mashing the same button over and over. With what little RPG elements it has, it was terrible. Basically, this game was a good idea, but it had the wrong developer to execute it. Jurassic Park the game. For a game developer that prides itself at storytelling and being a big Jurassic Park fan, Telltale fell badly at both. This game is a huge letdown. The game has practically nothing to do with the film and the gameplay suffers with a lack of direction. The control scheme can be clunky at times, repetitive quick-time events and hardly any sense of action got this game boring really fast. Many moments in the game require precise quick-time actions, but these would be more forgiving if the game's frame rate didn't constantly flutter. This game is an absolute mess and it's quite sad to see such a venerable franchise be spit on by such an irresponsible and lazy effort. Mass Effect 3. BioWare's shot for a wider audience backfired tremendously. They focused too much about making a story-centric game, only to have the story, the dialogue and especially the ending be absolutely terrible. In their desire to cater to the fans of shooters and casual games, BioWare has reduced the RPG elements, trivialized the dialogue and taken away much of the character development and choices that make a proper RPG. The gameplay itself is littered with terrible design decisions such as arbitrary timers, the scanning mechanic where you die, and the killing off of the characters for unexplainable reasons. The multiplayer component was pretty much an afterthought with not much depth into it. For of those wanting to know why the ending was so bad in the game, here's the reason. The ending makes every single action and choice you make in the previous games irrelevant. Monster Madness Battle for Suburbia. Monster Madness tricked players everywhere with its extremely well put together trailer showing 4-player co-op. Unfortunately, instead of what the trailer promised, players got nothing short of bullshit. Numerous technical issues, confusing design and a story that was almost non-existent. Despite a somewhat fun gameplay at times and unique graphics, it got extremely boring and repetitive very quickly. And the sequel didn't really help matters either.
Turning Point, Fall of Liberty. Turning Point, Fall of Liberty. It's a fantastic idea on paper, but it's ultimately let down by its repetitive gameplay and under par presentation. While there have been lots and lots and lots and lots of World War II shooters in the past, in general most gamers are somewhat tired of that theme. Then you think as a developer that you'd really try and make something memorable and special. Sadly, Spark have failed to do so, and with all the hype they've made prior to the game's release, it seems that they're somewhat out of touch as to what makes a compelling and amazing gaming experience. Even in the game feels lifeless and dull. Everything. There's a minor amount of fun to be had here, but with so many things that could have been better realized, the whole idea of the game has just been a wasted opportunity.
Tony Hawk Ride. The idea is your character on screen is supposed to execute the movements you make with the board, but the inaccuracy and even outright delay in delivering the information was ridiculous. It's not good when the game's defining feature doesn't even function properly. Some even found that they could play better by holding the board in their hands, and that's just plain wrong. It felt like the developers knew they weren't going anywhere, stopped mid-project, boxed the game, and shipped it, hoping to receive at least some payment to make up for the error of their ways. Bionic Commando. When it was first announced that Bionic Commando would be reborn in a next-gen form, those who remember the addictive side-scroller from the NES era became very excited. The bionic arm unsurprisingly was one of the cooler features of the combat and movement, allowing players to swing around the ruined city and zip kick latched on the enemies. The problem was the swing mechanic was overly complicated, and with no option to tweak the button configuration to the player's satisfaction, the game quickly got tiresome, and although you were faced with a relatively large and unique landscape, you were never really allowed to go exploring as the progression was almost entirely linear. The hero you played as, Nathan Spencer, was a totally unlikable character, constantly delivering snarky commentary that made it impossible to sympathise with him. Since the game spent most of its time loading, the game got more tiring to play.
007 Legends.
This time around, for the 50th anniversary, 007 Legends falls short hard. It's overambitious, there's no depth flow to the game's storyline, or even the way the game mechanics work. The biggest thing in 007 Legends is its sheer repetition and aggravation in the gameplay department. The fact that it mimics the Call of Duty's formula isn't the problem. It's the way it does nothing original, whilst packing in waves upon waves of mindless AI enemies onto the player. It attempts to take different great moments from 007's epic career and just throws it all together into one game, which makes no sense. It lacks in every way and attempts to cash in on our nostalgia. As a shooter, the game is incredibly lacking in any innovation or difficulty. It's very obvious 007 Legends had an extremely rushed development cycle.
Devil May Cry 2. Instead of simply perfecting a great formula, Capcom almost completely rewrote it and threw it out the window! It was done in an effort to please every gamer and critic, and the result was a game that, while it could have been decent as a standalone title, fails to carry on the name of Devil May Cry. The story is unappealing, the challenge is unengaging, and not only is there very little replayability, but most of the time you have a hard time finding the motivation to even beat the game itself. Devil May Cry 2 honestly felt as though the developers spent all their time and energy trying to fix what was wrong with Devil May Cry 1, rather than preserving what made the game in the original so great.
Black Site Area 51.
At the end of the demo, the extra features they mentioned being in the full game, like morale and co-op, seemed like an awesome idea. While the graphical quality of the demo was removed, technical bugs and glitches were present, it was rushed for release, none of that morale crap mattered, your AI bodies never died, and co-op mode was removed. The multiplayer is cheaply worked and contains very few multiplayer options in comparison to what was promised. It's a shame because the game was shaping up real nice and it had a certain element to the game that looked intriguing.
Postal 3. This one really hits home for me, seeing as Postal 2 is one of my all-time favorite games. I'll pop that sucker in any day. Now what they did with Postal 3 destroyed everything I loved about it. They took away everything that was cool and made it a linear, boring, broken, and unfunny mess of an interactive software thingy. Within the first 10 minutes, you can tell that it's one of the most poorly programmed games to come out of the Source engine. Yeah, they use the Source engine, especially considering all the years the developers had to program it. There's no excuse for it. The in-game camera and constricting levels with awkward controls and poor optimization. It just makes this list expand of grievous faults to absolutely exponential levels, and really hurts me, considering how much I love the series.
Too Human. It's hard to believe they spent more than 5 years making this game. It felt like a game that was meant for the developers to play instead of their customers. Lots of people were excited when it was first announced, but when it was released, lots of things were removed from the final product. There's no 4-player co-op, the actual game is only about 7 to 8 hours long, the bugs and the game's camera system is obnoxious. There's so many little annoyances that just pile up, and the ridiculous lack of variety in the environment is almost offensive. When people talk about dumbed down console titles, they're really referring to Too Human. Haze. The promising story was made terrible with awful character design and vocal work, and the AI was so bad it wasn't even laughable. A sparse multiplayer and boring level design added to the major mistakes by developer Free Radical Design. Haze is kept back from being good by only a few shortcomings. The story is pretty cliche as well. It's all these problems that hold Haze back from being great, and had they been fixed, this game would have been a whole lot better.
Star Wars: The Force Unleashed. It's ultimately the gameplay that lets this game and its sequel down. It can often be hard to use the Force as well as the game says that you can, and the lightsaber battles aren't that great either. The levels are so big that for the most part, it can be hard to figure out where the hell you're going. Force Unleashed is a bit of a rage quitter, and has little to do with straight difficulty. The controls are so bad, and so awkward, the word broken is the first thing that comes to mind. It's hard to believe that the game was passed by any kind of tester. It's really a shame because the potential is simply staring you right in the face while you're busy picking up pieces of your controller from having thrown it against the wall. It could have been a half-decent game. Hell, it could have been an amazing, incredible game. But the glaring glitches and some bad design and game choices not only brought this title down, but made it downright unenjoyable at times.
Hey me. This game had lots of hype, tons of publicity, and a lot of high expectations. It failed to deliver on all points. Apparently, after painting this amazing concept, the writers forgot how to compose anything resembling interesting. The concept is certainly a solid one, but the game's description is by far the most tantalizing aspect of it. The gameplay is 1/3 escort quest, 2/3 cheap death mixed with a total lack of direction, frustrating camera angles, and graphical glitches, causing the game to get hammered in the review scores very early on.
Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. If you've never played a Banjo-Kazooie game here, then that's fine and good. However, to those of us who've played both the original Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie, maybe some of you out there that's played Banjo-Kazooie Grunty Revenge, weren't you pretty outraged to discover that they made the newest Banjo-Kazooie into a driving game? See, Banjo-Kazooie has always been known for platformers. It's what Rare does with the BK formula. So why, all of a sudden, did Banjo-Kazooie look nothing like they used to? Banjo has a square nose. Kazooie doesn't even look like a Brigo anymore. And probably the most stupid is Mumbo Jumbo, who, as we all know, is a magical shaman in the series. Well, he somehow becomes a mechanic in this game. The same goes for Humba Wumba. She was a tribal Indian in Banjo-Tooie, who mysteriously turns into a cowgirl in this game. And the weird thing is, somehow in Nutty Acres they become married. Banjo-Kazooie they can't do any fighting moves but one attack. And I would say the most redeeming thing about this game is its unique graphics and excellent music. You can't help but think Rare should have sold this game by itself without disgracing its fans by introducing the Banjo cast with it.
Kinect Star Wars. Since camera tracking and motion control came out into the scene, Star Wars fans have been clamoring for a lightsaber combat game, me included. Many of us watched and rewatched the E3 2010 presser and saw the flaws, but realized that the game was in a very alpha or beta, so we had hope that the game would live up to its expectations. However, a year later when the game was released, the same problems were prevalent. Terminal Reality was so quick to release the game that other modes were just thrown in literally at the last moment. The game is incredibly limiting, and it feels like it reaches none of its potential of what a well-done Star Wars game could accomplish using Kinect. Let's not even start on the appalling dance mode. This game leaves you looking around for someone to blame for what is a disgusting waste of both engineers and artists' time. This game certainly fell to the dark side, and I think it's best to just leave it there. Call of Duty Black Ops Declassified. Despite being trailered for 2 years before it was released, in the end Declassified was reportedly the work of just 5 months, and it shows. Instead of a game to match Black Ops 2, all you got was a single-player mode that barely lasted 45 minutes, and a 4v4 multiplayer option that forced you to use tiny, poorly designed maps. The game removed the checkpoint feature, providing nothing but frustration, and even taking into account that it has been developed with the idea of a portable, easy to get in and get out game. It feels like the developers have taken simplification way too far. Call of Duty Declassified was overall just a huge disappointment. As a portable game, it seemed expensive, and a complete embarrassment to the Call of Duty series. As if every forthcoming Call of Duty entry in itself wasn't a big enough embarrassment to the series as it is.
Marvel Avengers Battle for Earth. The original idea for this game was a first-person action game where players could take control of their favourite Marvel heroes, which sounded like the only movie tie-in game that could ever impress anyone. Sadly, several weeks before the movie The Avengers was to be released, THQ pulled the plug on the Avengers game and the game was pulled out of the rubbish bin. Any positive reaction was quickly diluted when it turned out the game was to be remade in a whole new way. The slick-looking first-person aspect was lost, and the game turned into a truly terrible fighting game, in which the players select their 2 favourite Avengers and pitch them against each other in a jumbled mess.
Diablo 3. Considering that it was more than a decade since the last entry, there's no real innovation in terms of the combat systems, and no customizable characters, and very limited enemy artificial intelligence with a linear and short story campaign? There's no excuse for this! Players are required to log online even if they only need to play a single player portion of the game. An in-game cash shop that gives players more power in exchange for real-life currency details a perfect example of what corporate companies steal from the fans and the customers. As a result, it's hard not to get the impression that very little effort was put into the game, and by comparison, Torchlight 2 and Borderlands 2 were a lot more fun.
Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City. This game secretly appeared out of nowhere on the shelves. This sorry excuse for a third-person shooter looked and handled just like a really bad version of Gears of War, so no one really expected anything of it. Once again, the franchise changes more and more, stepping away from the original and going into a completely different style game. Raccoon City stands as one of the biggest facepalms of the year. Since Resident Evil 4, the franchise has been disappointing, with Resident Evil 5 and 6, but nothing will ever be as bad as Operation Raccoon City. In fact, this alone beats Resident Evil 6 in terms of disappointing, a major disappointment considering Capcom should be a quality game producer.
Steel Battalion Heavy Armor. The idea was there, but the game chose to commit the most grievous sin of centering itself around the Kinect, and that's where it failed. Most of the controls were based on the movements made by the gamer, such as moving your hands, which sounded like a fine concept, but the Kinect didn't seem to register your movements most of the time at all, and it's more annoying when the game demanded that it was crucial to win. This may be the most broken game on the Xbox 360, and you'll probably get more enjoyment watching someone else flail about like a complete jackass in an attempt to do it than to actually play this. Trust me, you'd enjoy that better. Make the popcorn now. I'll wait.
Spore. When Spore was first shown back at E3 2005, everyone was excited by its uniqueness, and then its creature creator was sent public, making everyone more pleased with the game. When everyone started pre-ordering the game, they were extremely disappointed with its outcome. Spore could have been a great game. It could have been exciting, entertaining, and in-depth. However, EA deliberately dumbed down the game, hoping to appeal to a wider audience. As others have said, it comes across as being a series of extremely simple mini-games centered around the best part of the game, the creature creator. This, combined with technical issues, slow patching, and the immediate release of an expansion pack, leaves us with the feeling of being ripped off and mildly insulted. Star Wars Galaxies. A Star Wars MMO? Awesome. That's what most players thought at E3 2002, but what we most certainly didn't expect was boring quests, very little connection to the players. The story is non-existent. Maybe the point was to make up your own, and when it was first released, it was a World of Warcraft clone. A watered down, poorly designed World of Warcraft clone. And for being an MMO, you couldn't really do anything with anyone else since there was no groups. The character customization was also very limited, with only 2 races and 4 classes. Most computers back then also couldn't handle the cinematics, if you could even call them that, so when one was about to play, the computer would kick you back to the desktop. The numerous errors, the glitches, the lagginess made it virtually unplayable, and even if you could, why would you want to?
Legendary. This is a good idea with very poor design and very annoying linear gameplay. Uninteresting enemies, outdated graphics, and again, absolutely frustrating gameplay. The story is actually pretty interesting, but the developers just killed the whole meaning of it with the final outcome. Legendary desperately wants to be a good game, but it ain't. It wants to be a roller coaster ride, but instead it just ends up feeling more like a leisurely stroll with a lot of bad shit happening around you. Even with everything happening, there's never a feeling of urgency in Legendary. It never feels like you're destined to do something. In truth, the only thing you're destined to do when playing this game is get bored and yearn for a better first-person shooter.
Bomberman Act Zero. Bomberman Act Zero is yet another failed attempt at resurrecting a classic arcade title into the next generation of gaming. We're not sure who the mastermind at Hudson Soft was that came up with the idea of taking one of the most revered and entertaining franchises in video games and trying to refuse it with all sorts of next-gen military ideas. It may be the new third-person camera angle, the new robotic characters, the new style of graphics that make this version so terrible. Interestingly, the back of the box proudly proclaims, "Survive through 99 stages," but I don't tell you that you have to do it all in one life. Daikatana.
a massive multi-million-dollar development cycle and a huge amount of delays and setbacks. It promised gameplay like no other FPS had ever done before. Wild weapons, varied settings with beautiful locales, advanced AI, RPG elements, AI sidekicks and a massive sprawling story. People were blown away by early screens, previews and videos, but after around 3 years of development, news of the project was surprisingly quiet. Millions of Doom and Quake fans were vigorously waiting for the release of this massively hyped game. The first reason to believe that the game wouldn't be as great as expected came when a subpar demo was released. The gameplay was fractured, difficult and used an annoying save system. Several users also complained of rampant bugs and freezes. After its release in 2000, the gaming community went wild, complaining about its idiotic AI sidekicks, ugly graphics, stupid monster AI, worthless weapons, linear and badly designed levels and terrible story. Nearly every aspect of the game was blotched terribly. On the hand, everything that was promised in the game was in the game, but it was just executed extremely badly. Daikatana will go down as one of the most spectacular failures and wastes of money ever. Battle Cruiser 3000 AD. Battle Cruiser 3000 AD set up wild ambitions for a large world, complex gameplay and smooth interaction with everything around you. Unfortunately, Battle Cruiser was released far too early, in a buggy, unplayable state. Expectant gamers that had waited for years were met with a mess of game, poorly executed missions and tons of bugs. The game is considered one of the most spectacular failures in history. Driver 3. Talk about Grand Theft Auto clones. Ironic, seeing as though Driver is a series which basically begun the sandbox action genre. This game was supposed to bring the Driver series to superstardom, but failed miserably. A point for pulling off Big City and for providing that bigger is not better by a long shot. Shallow gameplay, ridiculous AI, horrible lack of diversity, flat pacing, predictable spawn points, collision mesh, and nightmare invisible walls everywhere are some of the most dopiest interactivity we've ever seen. Make this one of the worst expensively produced games ever. There's just no excuse for it. Enter the Matrix. Enter the Matrix was a rather cool looking game, allowing you to venture into the world of the surprising smash hit film. Hopes were high, both from fans and the industry. Enter the Matrix turned out not to be the only weird and crappy, but also the exact things Matrix fans weren't looking for. Why do we get to play as Niobe and Ghost? Where was Neo and Trinity and Morpheus? It's like playing a new Mario game and then playing as Toad, or playing a new Star Wars game and then playing as a droid. This wasn't the only problem. The game was endlessly repetitive, featured unplayable driving missions and sported some bad graphics and terrible bugs. Sonic the Hedgehog. After the Dreamcast, Sega has simply never managed to revive Sonic's good name. Each new entry in the series somehow seems worse than the last. But we all held our hope when the first Sonic was revealed at the start of the generation. Sonic the Hedgehog, or commonly referred to as Sonic 06, was a game that fell flat on its face and was famed for being poorly programmed and being in a state that was nowhere near completion when it was released for sale. The game's story is a convoluted mess of plot holes and lack of logic. The level design consists of poorly scripted events and bad design choices. The horrible camera system, the long loading times and the overall technical aspects plagued this one from the very start. Duke Nukem Forever. Duke Nukem Forever has had a long, storied and excessively stormy development history. Originally planned for a 1998 release, the game suffered from several engine changes coupled with delay after delay until it was released 14 years late, only to be critically planned for being dated and univar. All the right pieces to the Duke formula were there, but it seemed like gamers' tastes had evolved and were looking for something that wasn't just poop jokes. The game suffered from numerous technical glitches too. The rendering on the online play took so long to load the graphics that you died right after. The original Duke Nukem games had you carrying a multitude of guns, but here we have the Halo style gameplay where you can only hold a few weapons, have a regenerating health system and giant open areas. There were fun parts, but was overall a pretty god awful game and certainly not worthy of a 10-year wait.
Lair. Ooh, arguably the biggest letdown of the 7th generation of gaming. This bombshell had a massive amount of hype, almost reaching heights of gaming juggernauts such as GTA and MGS. The claimed revolutionary 6-axis control, the ability to fly dragons, and the fact that this gameplay was set in a monumental medieval war zone only made the pain much more substantial when the world ended up with a rubber Godzilla title, which not only controlled badly but had awful graphics and sound, something that the PS3 should have been able to repair. An absolute entire waste of potential.
Grand Theft Auto 4. I remember queuing up for the initial launch of this game, coming home and playing it, and after about an hour I realised it just doesn't even come close to what the original Grand Theft Auto Vice City or San Andreas could touch. Where's the RPG stats that was in San Andreas? Why can't you swim underwater no more? Where's all that compelling story to propel you further? Where's all those fun extras and Easter eggs we all come to expect? Where's those crazy vehicles to drive? Where's the modding garage for the cars? Why are there so much more police around so you can't do anything fun anymore like carjack someone without attracting attention? Why is there a fire department in the game but when you cause fires they never turn up to put out any? Why can't you do side missions anymore like ambulance driver, firefighter, ice cream truck or derby rings like the original? There's just so much stuff missing in this game. It doesn't help with the insane amount of hype this game gave. Now looking back on it, we see that most of that footage shown was in fact not gameplay, but merely cinematic cutscenes. The game is still buggy and has way too much realism. Too much realism in a game is completely unnecessary. The controls are incredibly unresponsive, and you'll find that when frantically trying to run away from enemies or chasing after them. The missions are pretty much the same: wax this guy, pick up the loot, escape from the cops, vice versa. And failing a mission means you have to do the whole thing from the start. Yep, no checkpoints. Saints Row 2 picked up on this and meant if you failed a certain point there would wait checkpoints so you'd have to go back for the whole mission again. But Grand Theft Auto again fails to deliver what we could not like to drive to the same destination for the 17th time to have another stab at beating it. On a more positive note, the graphics and animations are lifelike, but that's not really to the point. Don't tell me, oh Tats, it's better with a DLC. Yeah, and the game should have had these from the start, not a couple of months down the line, and not spending money on DLC that should have already been in the game. You know, most game reviews lied or bribed about this game when they reviewed it, stating the game was a fantastic masterpiece, giving it 10 out of 10. Okay, let's get this straight. 10 out of 10 means it's perfect in every way. No bugs, no errors, perfect. This game ain't perfect. If this game was so groundbreaking, wouldn't everyone still be playing it to this day? Most next-gen games today don't get a 10 out of 10, maybe 9 or 9.5, so why did GTA 4? And before you PC gamers start defending this game, how many of you downloaded mods to make it actually more fun? Yeah, just as I thought, take those mods away and play it now. How are you supposed to be? I found this game incredibly disappointing and am in no way buying the DLC, and I'm pretty sure many of you other Grand Theft Auto fans out there, true fans, would probably agree with me on this. All we can do now is pray that this Grand Theft Auto 5 is the Grand Theft Auto game we've always asked for.